So good day everyone. So here we have another lesson for today, which is about active and passive voice. So understanding the active and passive voice. So before we continue, what do we mean first by voice? So voice is connected to verbs. So voice is the form of a verb takes to indicate whether the subject of the verb performs or receives the action. So there are two types of voice, the active voice and the passive voice. So when we say active voice, it indicates that the subject of the verb is the one doing the action. It is the one acting. Because the subject does or acts upon the verb in such sentences. The sentences are said to be in the active voice. So these examples show that the subject is doing the verb's action. So basically, in the active voice, the subject is the doer of the action. So the dog jumped onto the boy. So here, the dog, the subject, is the one doing the jumping. Christy will give a book report to the class. So Christy will be the one doing the giving. The computer ate my paper. The computer was the one that ate the paper. Next, passive voice. So it is basically the opposite. So in a passive voice sentence, the subject and object flip-flop. So they change places. This time, the subject becomes the passive recipient of the action. So in a passive voice sentence, the subject is the receiver of the action. The subject is the one getting the action. He's not, or it is, he or she is not doing the action. He is receiving the action. Because the subject is being acted upon or is passive, such sentences are said to be in the passive voice. These examples show the subject being acted upon the verb, or the subject is receiving the action. The boy was jumped on by the dog. So, was the boy jumping? No. So, the boy received the action jump. A dog jumped over the boy. The boy did not do the jumping. He only received the jump from the dog. Next, a book report will be given by Christy to the class. So, is the book report going to give? No. The book report will be given. So the book report will receive the action that it is going to be given to someone. It is not that the book will give something. No. So next, my paper was eaten by the computer. So the subject here is the paper. Did the paper ate or was the paper eaten? So here, since the paper was eaten by the computer, the paper received the action. The paper did not eat anything. The paper was the thing that was eaten by the computer. So here, basically, the passive voice, the subject is the receiver of the action. So again, in the passive voice, the subject and the object trade places. So here, again, let's go with the last sentence. The computer ate my paper. The computer is the subject, computer. The paper is the object. And turned it into passive voice, they change places. The subject this time is the paper and the object is the computer. So reasons to use the active voice. Most writers prefer to use active voice because it is more direct. So active voice, you are basically being direct, straight to the point. So the waiter dropped the tray of food. That's the active. So it's straight to the point. Oh, that waiter dropped a tray of a tray of food. In the passive voice, the tray of food was dropped by the waiter. See, of course, we can already see or see that in the passive form, it is much longer. That's why it is preferred by most writers. But the reason also why it is more preferred by writers is because it is more direct, or it is straight to the point. The active voice is less awkward and clearly states relationship between the subject and the action. So the active voice sentence pattern propels the reader forward through your writing, thus avoiding weak prose. So here we go. Another point of why use active voice. Because it is less awkward and it shows more clearly the relationship of the subject and the action. Again, in the waiter. So what's the relationship of the waiter and the action? So the waiter dropped a tray of food. So done. Very straight. Now, why do we have the passive voice? So of course, there are times that we need to use the passive voice of a verb. So when? So in general, the passive voice is less direct, less forceful, and less concise than the active voice. So we will use the passive voice in the following situations. When you do not know or do not want to reveal the performer of an action. When you want to emphasize the receiver of an action. So for examples, my bicycle was repainted. So, again, when you do not want to reveal who did the painting or who did the action. So, my bicycle was repainted. So, who received the repainting? The bicycle. But, that's already in the passive voice. If you want to not say the person who painted the bicycle, so we already have the passive voice. But to completely change the original sentence into a passive voice, then this is the correct one. My bicycle was repainted by John. But again, less direct, less forceful, less concise, and a bit awkward because the active voice is a less awkward. The passive voice is more awkward. That's why awkward passive, my bicycle was repainted by John. So, the passive voice requires a double verb and will always consist of a form of the verb to be and the past participle, usually the en, ed, or t form of another verb. So here we go. We're going to talk about the changing of an active to passive. So here we have the active voice. John baked the bread. So changing it to the passive form, we have two verbs. We will add an additional verb. And that verb is the verb to be. Its proper version. So you need to know what are the proper version of the verb to be. And these verbs are the is, was, were, and so on and so forth. So, John baked the bread. In order to change it into passive, again, first of all, switch places the place of the subject and the object. So, the object is bread, so put it in the place of the subject. And the subject is John, put it in the place of the object. So, the bread becomes the first thing to be said, and John becomes the last thing to be said. So, the bread, the proper verb to be, so was, past participle of bake is still baked. So, was baked, add the word by, then write the subject. So, the bread was baked by John. So, that's the passive form. So, writers, so you guys should be familiar with the forms of the verb to be, often called the linking verbs or auxiliary verbs, so that they can easily identify the passive voice in their work. So, some forms of the verb to be or linking verbs or auxiliary verbs are am, is, are, was, were, be, being, and been. Again, word is some. They're not all here. You need to know it yourselves. So note the difference of active to passive. So, is kick, let's say, Amir is kicked in the balls. Yes, Amir is kicked in the balls. So, his balls had been kicked. Next is was kicked. Passive form is going to be kicked, is being kicked, will be kicked, has been kicked, can be kicked, was being kicked, should be kicked. Often, passive voice sentences will contain a by phrase, indicating who or what performed the action. Passive sentences can easily transform into active sentences by when the object of the preposition by is moved to the subject position in the sentence. So this time, we're going to talk about the changing of a passive voice into an active voice. So, it's basically you're just going to do the opposite of changing active to passive. So, here is the passive voice. The cookies were eaten by the children. So, here are the object. So, we're going to put it back at the back. And the subject, the children, going back to the front. So, we have the children. In the passive voice, we added the verb or the linking verb were. So, we're going to take that out. We're going to delete. And we have the past participle eaten. So, we're going to change it back into just past form. And remove the word by. So, we have the active form. The children ate the cookies. Same, the tunnels are dug by the gophers. The gophers dug the tunnels. Okay. So I will ask you to practice this at your own pace. So just additional information. So that's all basically for our active and passive voice. So additional information in order for you to have a much more clear understanding. So we have here an equation, like in mathematics, there are equations. In the active voice, so basically, here is the format of an active voice sentence. So we have the subject, the verb, then the object. Amir played computer. Done. Subject, Amir. Me. What's the verb? Played. What did I play? Computer. Done. Passive voice. Going to put this object in the front and the subject in the back. Put the proper verb to be. So it's either is, was, were, so on and so forth. As long as their linking verbs should be proper, okay? Depends on the sentence. Change the verb into its past participle form and add by. Yan. Change the verb past participle form, add by, and again, last, we have the subject at the back. So again, the active voice is Amir played computer. Let's change it into passive. So the computer was played by Amir. Okay, so that's basically the active and passive voice. So I hope you understand. If you have any questions, feel free to ask questions to me. So that is all for our lesson, active and passive voice. So again, thank you and goodbye.